Hey guys, this is for the sophomores. Today we're going to continue talking about the Gilded Age, and we're going to focus on two areas in particular. One, the unbelievable creativity that emerged from the Gilded Age, and not just emerged from the Gilded Age, but contributed to the huge economic growth of the period. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the costs of industrial expansion, particularly the human costs. Okay. Now, in addition to corporate consolidation, new inventions and advertising contributed to the development of the Gilded Age. Now, America was unique in its amazing ability to kind of produce life-changing inventions. I always hesitate to, bring it up that way because I don't want it to make it look like I'm being, over nationalistic or anything. But we are definitely a tinkering people, Americans. So, like, we came up with an enormous amount of inventions that really changed life during the Gilded Age and contributed to the huge economic boom of the Gilded Age. Now, probably the biggest innovation was the development of safe ways to generate electricity and bring that into people's homes and factories, and it made a revolution possible, the ability to harness electricity. Now, some inventions that came out of the United States that revolutionized life. The sewing machine, which actually had been invented before the Gilded Age, but was certainly integral to a lot of factories and also revolutionized home life as well. The telephone, invented in 1876 by Alexander Graham Bell, right? And the telephone revolutionized life, right? And it created a company, Bell Telephone, which of course later became AT&T. Ma Bell, they used to call it. You can ask your parents or your grandparents about Ma Bell. That was the old name for AT&T when it was the only telephone company that existed in the United States, and that all came out of the invention of the telephone. Now, of course, we take for granted the telephone, as have generations of Americans. But just imagine what that must be like for a lot of people who, actually had to visit their relatives or send them a letter, or their friends. So to actually have the telephone is a revolutionary change for sure. Now, the man who probably represented who was the epitome of the American inventor during the Gilded Age, and for decades after, of course, was Thomas Edison. Now, in the past few years, I've actually gotten a lot of response anytime we talk from students, every time we talk about Thomas Edison, because I think it's becoming more well known now that a lot of the inventions that came out of Edison's factory he didn't invent them himself. A lot of this just came out of the people who worked in his lab, in Edison's lab, that were attributed to Edison personally. I'm sure that is the case. I haven't done enough research into that, but Edison, and let's put it this way: Edison and Edison's lab contributed to an enormous amount of inventions. And one of the reasons why Edison captured the public imagination the way that he did, both during his lifetime and since, is because he was the epitome of the self-made man. Remember, that was the whole ideal of American life. Little education, no status at all. Started off poor. He was deaf as well, or at least functionally deaf from a railway accident when he was working on the trains when he was 13 years old. And Edison's vision was of an interconnected industrial system resting on technological innovation, but also resting on electricity. Now, he created a research facility, Edison did, in Menlo Park, New Jersey. And the Menlo Park lab included the nation's top scientists. And Edison boasted that, quote, a minor invention every 10 days, a major one every 6 months came out of the Menlo Park lab. And of course, this famous line, which I'm actually going to title this video, is that genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So basically, you got to put the work into it. I think that's very good advice just in general, and with regardless of whatever goal it is you're pursuing. Now, Edison's vision was a system of electric lighting electricity throughout the country. Generators, power meters, power lines, wiring into people's homes and businesses. This is the vision which, of course, transformed life for the people in this country and ultimately worldwide. In 1877, he invented the phonograph, the record player, which could play music. And in 1879, of course, his most famous invention, the light bulb. Now, Edison and his scientists actually tried hundreds of different materials before coming up with the carbon filament, which, of course, was successful. And the light bulb, again, something else we take for granted, but just imagine how transformative the light bulb must have been for people during the time, right? Because, before, life stopped when it got dark, right? Except maybe a little kerosene lamp or well blubber lamp before that in your house you could light if it got dark. But if you've ever been out in the country or in a suburban area where there really are no outdoor lights, that's what night looks like. Night is pitch black. And the thing is, that's how sometimes for us city people, when we go out to the country for the first time, it's a bit of more than a bit, it's a huge adjustment for us to kind of get used to the pitch black. Because think about it, street lights are just giant light bulbs. Right? So without light bulbs, not only can't you light your house, but you can't light the night sky either. And the flow of inventions that came out of Edison's lab was extraordinary. The Mimeo machine, which makes copies. There's one in the more modern version in the nurse's office, if ever you've seen it at school. The microphone, the voting machine, the old-fashioned voter machine where you actually pull the lever down. Maybe you still remember that from when you guys were very little. The motion picture camera was invented by Thomas Edison and his lab. And of course, Thomas Edison, not of course, you probably don't know this, but Thomas Edison was actually the earliest pioneer of the early film industry. And that was made possible because of his invention. That was made possible because of his invention of the motion picture camera. In all, Edison patented 1,093 different inventions, and Menlo Park became the inspiration for other companies to establish their own labs as well. Kodak ultimately did that. General Electric, which was also founded by Thomas Edison. DuPont, which makes chemicals. So basically, using science in support of industrialization. And these technological innovations and inventions that came out of America during the Gilded Age were absolutely transformative, as was, in the biggest, electricity. A lot of these inventions were only functional at all if we had electricity. Electricity was extremely expensive at first, as are all new products when they first come out, but it completely revolutionized life towards the end of the Gilded Age and as we were getting into the 20th century. Electric streetcars, subways, public lighting systems, basically all the parts of what we consider modern life are made possible only through electricity. So that was Edison's vision. Even though Edison wanted to use DC current for electricity, and ultimately we decided to use AC current, which we still use, which actually Nikola Tesla came up with that, not Edison, interestingly. Now, one of the big problems, I don't know if you could call this a problem, but I guess it was for corporate America, was there was a glut of products. There were so many things that were actually produced during the Gilded Age that output actually exceeded what the market could absorb. And there were so many mass-produced products, soap, canned food, flour, and that's the big one we're going to talk about in a minute. So much was being produced that industrialists had to figure out a way to get people to buy all these mass-produced products. And ultimately, that's where advertising came in. You had to sell people on the idea of buying things that they didn't even know they needed or wanted. And it was a necessity because there were so many excess products created during the Gilded Age, and advertising became a critical part Gilded Age America. Now, flour production increased significantly in the 1870s, and because there was so much excess of flour, new products had to be sold. So that's when cake mixes, cereals, Quaker oats. That's when these things kind of became part of the fabric of American life because of the excess of flour that was actually being produced during the Gilded Age. That's why people you know started eating cereal. Customer loyalty was really sought. Because to this day, almost all corporations have psychologists working for them. And the thing is, corporations know that if they win your loyalty, if you start buying a product from a certain company, you're likely to stay with that company. That's why diaper companies give free diapers to hospitals because they know that the diapers that people are given, new mothers are given after birth, the diapers that they're given for free in the hospital are probably going to be the diapers that they buy when they go to the store to buy diapers on their own for their babies. Because if you win loyalty, you potentially have a customer for a very long time to come, and that's something that they really companies really desire. Also, and I wish we class I could show you this. The birth of the department store. The department store was so important it came out of the Gilded Age because it sold a variety of different products. It was huge, right? And you could buy anything in the department store, right? Things for your home, clothes, personal items, whatever. You could actually go to the department store and buy these things. Now, if you didn't have a department store with you, or not with you, near you, the thing that kind of came in the most handy was something called the Sears catalog. A lot of you guys, in fact, most of you guys probably have never heard of the Sears catalog, the wish book. But in its day, during the late Gilded Age into the 20th century, the Sears catalog was almost as important as Amazon is today. Literally, it was a giant catalog, as big as a phone book. You probably don't even know what a phone book is, but it's big, a very thick catalog, which basically had every item imaginable. So even if you lived in an isolated area of the country, you could look through the Sears catalog and buy any item that you wanted. And because of all the railroads, you could have it shipped to your house. So that was revolutionary during the Gilded Age. Excuse me. Now, all these things are great, but there were also huge human costs to industrial expansion. Now, the early Gilded Age was very chaotic. There were hundreds of different businesses, but by 1900, the United States was the most productive nation in the world, with three industries that we talked about in previous videos dominating life during the Gilded Age: railroads, oil, and steel. Those were the three giant industries. Now, as we enter this era towards the later part of the Gilded Age of corporate consolidation, of one company or one man basically controlling most of an industry, things really began, harming the consumer, right? Monopolies are not good for the consumer because then they can charge whatever they want. But before the corporate consolidation, when there was a lot of competition, consumers could actually look for the lowest price. They had a variety of different options to choose from. All these technological innovations were absolutely remarkable for Americans living during this time. But all of this was made possible by worker exploitation. Now, workers were usually underpaid and exploited. The average American worker, blue collar, meaning guy working in a factory, worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. That was the standard, and it was in fact common for people to have to work even more than that. But these hours were absolutely grueling. Now, it was very common also for small and medium-sized businesses to go belly up, to go bankrupt, because there's no way they could actually compete with all these big behemoths that were developing. This is what Rockefeller said about that. Quote, "I only want the big businesses. As for the others, they have to die." Remember what his son said, the American beauty rose, right? That's what he wanted his father to be, that the only way that one big rose can grow to be big and strong and beautiful is by actually getting rid of the weeds and the smaller roses around it. So that was kind of Rockefeller and a lot of the robber barons' vision, for American economic life, right? That one business ultimately has to reign supreme. I think they would really they would like where Jeff Bezos is going with Amazon. So all these new products we talked about, all the positive changes of Gilded Age life were basically built on, and this is important to remember, low wages, long hours, zero job protection, and zero workplace safety laws. So those big fortunes were made as a result of these very unfortunate, very unfortunate phenomena. Now, the demand for unskilled labor was huge. A third of all workers during the Gilded Age were unskilled. Now, unskilled means you don't have a trade, right? You're not an electrician, a carpenter, or a miller, or whatever. So you don't have a specific trade, right? You're just basically anybody can just kind of go in and do the job. And a third of all workers were unskilled. Especially in the railroad and the steel industries. They just needed people to just basically work the factories. The construction industry, the garment industry was completely dependent on unskilled labor. And again, very low wages, zero job protections. And the average unskilled laborer made $1.30 a day during the Gilded Age. I should have done inflation calculator. Our favorite website, right? We always like looking at that in class. Okay, let me do that right now. I'll look on my phone. Hold on. Okay, just checked. So $1.30 a day is the equivalent of $37 today. So the average unskilled worker made in today's money, $37. So try supporting a family like that. So it often led to people living very transient lives, where people didn't really have roots in any one place, particularly, where people just kind of wandered around from job to job, right? Because do you really have any loyalty to some job where you're making $1.30, right? And have no protections and really no regard for you. Now, the scourge of the Gilded Age was child labor. Children were routinely used in American factories. I think in 1900, I'm pretty sure, one in five children were actually working. And by children, I don't mean guys your age, like young children were working in factories. It was an integral part of life during the Gilded Age. Now, it certainly had a lot of advantages for big business, right? They could pay children very little, right? Children tend to be more compliant. Little children, not teenagers, but little children tend to be more compliant. They tend to just do what they're told. And you could pay them next to nothing. Their hands were small, could actually fit into certain equipment that would not work for adults. So children were used in major industries in America. Coal mines, copper mills. Children started working sometimes at the age of 8 or 9. And seeing children working was an integral part of life during the Gilded Age. One of the reasons why, and I know it's a nuisance, but you have to go get your working papers and all of that, from the office, if you guys want to start looking for a job, is because the government wants you protected to make sure that you're not your priority should be school, and you're not spending all your time working when you're underage, because this was a very, very serious problem, and progressive reformers often hit this as one of their biggest, if not the biggest issue that they wanted dealt with. They wanted reform from Gilded Age life to stop child labor. Injuries and illness were very, very common for both children and adults. In just one random year, 1889, the railroad industry, 2,000 people were killed working on the railroads, 20,000 were injured. That was just in one random year, 1889, that I picked. So it was very, very common to get injured on the job. And if you were disabled, no assistance was given to you. It was just basic from your employer or from the government, right? So it was basically, oh, well, you're on your own. Your family has to take care of you, or you have to just figure something out. And the railroads and factory owners fought any government regulation fiercely. And one of the big causes for the progressives, I know ending child labor, I discussed one, and ending monopolies. Another big cause for them was a system of workman's compensation, where if you get hurt on the job, that you could actually get money, shared by from the government partly and from your employer partly, um, in order to in order to be able to support yourself till you're able to work again. So this is very, very scary, right? You could be working hard, doing everything you're supposed to do, and then you get hurt, and then you have no way of making a living. Right, you're completely on your own. It's a very, very scary thing, but it was very common during the Gilded Age, and we should remember that. Now, factories often turned for their unskilled labor to immigrants. Now, immigrants were often very desperate and wanted to work so badly that they took any job for almost any pay. Now, different immigrant groups tended to work in different industries. If we were in New England, we might know a lot of people who are French Canadian, because a lot of French Canadian worked in the mills that were still in the north, even though during this era, most of the mills, or at least the bulk of the mills, moved down south where you could pay people even less. Chinese people we know out west tended to work in mining and construction. But at this time, huge amount of immigrants were arriving from Southern and Eastern Europe, which we're going to talk about in subsequent videos. And the thing is, this completely transformed American corporate life, right? Because there's always this ready source of labor, unskilled immigrant labor that could be exploited. Now, factory life was relentless and it was merciless. So in addition to having to work these 12-hour days, 6-day weeks, rigid timetables, constantly, where every minute was pretty much dictated by the factory of what you're going to be doing. That was very different than farm life. Well, in addition to immigrants, a lot of people from rural America began moving into the cities as well, looking for jobs. So I should mention that. So it was basically an internal migration as well as immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. Discipline was also enforced pretty harshly. Like, you weren't beaten, but you were usually forced to go to Sunday school on your day off. Temperance societies came in to try to convince you not to drink. A lot of business owners were really big supporters of temperance because they were worried that their workers were going to show up drunk. Sometimes wages were cut to some piecemeal type system where you'd only get paid by the product you made, which is really crazy. Sometimes they provided you with housing. And the thing is, when housing was provided to you, then that increased their leverage over you. You're more reluctant to quit or go on strike if you know that your house, the place you live in, is tied with your employer, which is honestly a similar situation as people have now with their health insurance, right? Sometimes people feel tied to jobs because they don't want to lose their health insurance. Some factory owners use bigotry to try to draw wedges between the workers, right? By trying to draw a wedge between black and white, obviously, right? Because that's the old racial division, but also between the darker whites and the lighter whites, between the Italians, the Eastern Europeans, and the Irish, and the old stock American WASPs, right? Because the thing is, if you kind of excite their bigotry, and try to make them think that they're different than those other people, the workers are less likely to band together and fight for better conditions, right? Because they're divided amongst themselves, because they don't really see a commonality with a worker who might have a darker skin or go to a different religion, when in reality there's enormous commonality. Now, women in industrial America, upper class. Let's talk about them for a little bit. Upper class women generally accepted that there were different spheres of influence for women. Men worked and women were in the home, and that was something that upper class women could afford, right? Because their husbands made enough money, so they didn't have to work. But working class women, even married women, often did have to work in order to keep the family afloat. Many women worked at home, particularly in the clothing industry. They made clothes at home, which was something necessary for the family budget. Some young single women actually viewed factory work as liberating, because at least they're making some money, and at least it gets them away, from the house. But sometimes it went away from their house, but to another house. Because a lot of women, the work that they did were as cooks and as maids in the house of upper class families. But ultimately, that began to shift. Women did begin to start working in factories more, particularly immigrant families. Immigrants often sent their daughters to work, and this was the cheapest labor source imaginable, right? Poor immigrant female labor. So a lot of they could pay these poor women like next to nothing. So that group was actually sought after. Usually, a woman's pay in 1890, a average woman's pay was half the pay of a male worker, which unfortunately is a problem we're still experiencing. Now the thing is that role economic life of women also changed, because of two major inventions that came out of the Gilded Age: the telephone, as we talked about, as well as the typewriter. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but that's the way before we had computers. We used to type everything. A typewriter, the keyboard you see on the computer, you might see QWERTY. Why are those numbered letters together? Well, that's because that was the keyboard for a typewriter, and when you pressed, say, W, a key went W. So if they put it in alphabetical order, a lot of the a lot of the sticks would get stuck because the letters are used together very often. So by mixing it up, it would be less likely for the keys to hit each other when you're typing. So that's the reason we have this bizarre keyboard QWERTY that we have. But the typewriter and the telephone revolutionized life for American women, because of these inventions. Women can now pursue office work, working with the telephone and the typewriter, doing clerical jobs, doing secretarial work. The pay and the working conditions in an office were generally better than the working conditions were in a factory. So a lot of these technological innovations allowed women to actually branch out from factory life into office jobs. But we're still, which had somewhat higher prestige, but still were paid. You were still paid much less than men, and working your way up from that really was not possible. All right, guys, so I know we talked about a lot of material in this video. I hope you watch from start to finish. Remember, I want you guys to do that for all these videos. I hope you're all doing well, and check out the page later in the week for a new video. All right, peace.